It was always at night. The arrests invariably happened at night. The sudden jerk out of sleep, the rough hand shaking your shoulder, the light glowing in your eyes, the ring of hard fish round the bend. In the vast majority of cases, there was no trail, no report of the arrest. People simply disappeared, always during the night. Your name was removed from the registers. Every record of everything you had ever done was wiped out. Your one-time existence was denied and then forgotten. You were abolished, annihilated. Vaporized was the usual word. For a moment, he was seized by a kind of hysteria. He began writing in a hurry, untidy, scared. They will shoot me. I don't care. They will shoot me in the back of the neck. I don't care, down with the big brother. They always shoot you in the back of the neck. I don't care, down with big brother. He sat back in his chair, slightly ashamed of himself, and laid down the pen. The next moment, he started violently. There was a knocking at the door. Already, he said, as still as a mouse, in the futile hope that whoever it was might go away after a single attempt. But no, the knocking was repeated. The worst thing of all would be delay. His heart was tramping like a drum. Well, like a drum. His heart was tramping like a drum. His heart was tramping like a drum. But his face, from long habit, was probably expressionless. He got up and moved heavily towards the door. Dum, dum, dum. As he put his hand to the door, knocked, Winston saw that he had left the diary open on the table. Down with Big Brother was writing all of it, in letters almost big enough to be legible across the room. It was an inconceivable, stupid thing to have done. But, he realized, even in his panic, he had not wanted to smuggle the creamy paper by shutting the book while the ink was wet. He drew in his breath and opened the door. Instantly, a warm wave of relief flowed through him. A colorless, crash-looking woman with whisper hair and a lined face was standing outside. "Oh, comrade," she began in a dreary, shining, whining sort of voice. "I thought I heard you come in. Do you think you could come across and have a look at our kitchen sink? It's got blocked up and—" It was Mrs. Parsons, the wife of a neighbor on the same floor. Mrs. was a word somewhat discountenanced by the party. You were supposed to call everyone comrade, but with some women one used it instinctively. She was a woman of about 30, but looking much older. One had the impression that there was dust in the seats of his face. There was dust in the creases of her face. Winston followed her down the passage. These amateur repair jobs were almost daily. These amateur repair jobs were an almost daily irritation. Victoria mansions were old flats. Built in the 1930s or thereabout, and were falling to pieces. The plaster flagged constantly from ceiling and walls. The pipes burst in every hard forest. The roof leaked whenever there was snow. The heating system was usually running at half steam, when it was not closed down altogether from motive or economy. Repairs, except what you could do for yourself, had to be sanctioned by remote committees, which were liable to hold up even the mending of a window pane for 2 years. Of course, it's only because Tom isn't home, said Mrs. Parsons vaguely. The Parsons flat was bigger than Winston's, and dingy in a different way. Everything had the better timed on look, as though the place had just been visited by some large violent animal. Games, impediment, hockey sticks, boxing gloves, a burst football, a pair of sweaty shorts turned inside out lay all over the floor. And on the table there was a little of dirty dishes and dog-excited books. On the walls were scarlet banners of the Young Legion and the Spies, and a full-sized poster of Big Brother. There was the usual boiled cabbage smell, common to the whole building, but it was shot through by a sharpened rack of sweat, which one knew this at the first sniff. Though it was hard to see how was the sweat of some person not present at the moment. In another room, someone with a comb and a piece of toilet paper was trying to keep tune with the military music which was still issuing from the telescreen. "It's the children," said Mrs. Parsons, casting a half-apprehensive glance at the door. "They haven't been out today, and of course—" She had a habit of breaking off her sentence in the middle. The kitchen sink was full nearly to the brim with filthy greenish water which smelled worse than ever of cabbage. Winston knelt down and examined the angle joint of the paper. He hated using his hands, and he hated burning down, which was always liable to start him coughing. Mrs. Parsons looked on helplessly. "Of course, if Tom was home, she'd put it right in a moment," she said. "He loves everything like that. He's ever so good with his hands, Tom is." Parsons was Winston's fellow employee at the Minister of Truth. He was a fatless but active man of prancing stupidly, a mass of embassy enthusiasm, one of those completely unquestioned, devoted dragging on whom, moreover than on the thought policy, the stability of the party depended. At 34, he had just been unwilling. At 35, he had just been unwilling, evicted from the Young Legion. And before graduating into the Young Legion, he had managed to stay in the Spies for a year beyond the statutory age. As a minister, he was employed in some subordinate post for which intelligence was not required. But on the other hand, he was a leading figure on the sports community and all other communities, engaged in organization community hikes, spontaneous demonstrations, saving campaigns, and voluntary activities generally. He would inform you with quiet pride. He would inform you. He would inform you with pride. He would inform you with quiet pride. Between whiles of his piper, between whips of his pipe, and he had put in appearance at the community center every evening for the past 4 years. An overpowering smell of sweat, a sort of unconscious testimony to the seriousness of his life, followed him about wherever he went, and even remained behind him after he had gone. "Have you got a spanner?" said Winston, fiddled with the nut on the angle joint. "A spanner," said Mrs. Parsons, immediately becoming invertebrate. "I don't know. I'm sure. Perhaps the children." There was a tramping of boots and another blast on the come as the children charged into the living room. Mrs. Parsons brought the spanner. Winston let out the water and disgustedly removed the cloud of human hairs that had blocked up the pipe. He cleaned his fingers as best as he could in the cold water from the tap, and went back into the other room. "Up with your hands!" yelled a savage voice. A handsome, tough-looking boy of 9 had popped up from behind the table and was menacing him with the toy automatic pistol. With the toy automatic pistol, while his small sister, about 2 years younger, made the same gesture with the fragment of wood. Both of them were dressed in the blue shirts, gray shirts, and the blue neckerchiefs which wore the uniform of the Spires. Winston raised his hands above his head, but with an uneasy feeling. So vicious was the boy's demeanor that it was not altogether a game.